I'd like to welcome everyone to our call this morning. In light of this current coronavirus pandemic and its impact on society's health and the investing landscape for that matter, the Professional Services Division of Zacks Investment Research is making this special report available to you in an effort to provide some valuable information, primarily from the scientific perspective, and even a little comment on the investment perspective as well. And joining us today to help do that and fill in some of the blanks is Zacks Small Cap Senior Biotech Analyst John Vandermosten. John is going to focus on what pharma is doing to bring treatments to the market, other scientific developments, as well as more pertinent forward-looking analysis. And if you have any questions for John, don't hesitate to type them in the message field at the right of your screen, and we will try to get to as many as we have time for, and time is always a commodity on these calls that we put together. Basically speaking, John, let's start with this. Coronavirus, as I understand it, is a family of viruses that can cause respiratory symptoms that are similar to the common cold and seasonal flu. So without rehashing the origin of this virus, which has already been pretty much made public, what else about the science behind this virus do we need to be aware of?
Hey, thanks, Terry. And yeah, it is a little bit different from some of the other references that you made there, the cold or the seasonal flu, or even the previous SARS. And I have a slide here actually that's pretty helpful to use as a guide as we think about that. One of the important things about any virus is the incubation period and how that overlaps with the infectious period. If there's a big overlap there, that means you can get people, if you're infected, you can get people sick without knowing you're sick, and it really enhances the spread of it. And then when you get into the symptomatic period, people know you have the disease, but you're still infectious. So that was really important to pay attention to how that is. And it seems like for the coronavirus, it's a little bit more extended, especially in younger people. They may appear to be well, but they actually have the disease, even though they're not showing any symptoms. Another important factor is how easily the disease spreads, how many people catch the disease from one contagious person. So if we only have one person giving it to one other person, eventually it will die out. But if one person gives it to more than one person, then it can actually grow exponentially. And a few examples, measles, that's known as probably one of the more highly infectious diseases out there. And let me actually advance to a slide here that, let's see, this one right here. Down at the bottom, the term R naught, that's how many people can get it from one other person. For the flu, it's maybe around 2. For measles, it ranges from 12 to 18. And for SARS, it's from 2 to 3. So it is a little bit more infectious than some of the other viruses that go around. And we can reduce this number. I mean, the great thing about this is that we can actually do something about it. And we've heard wash your hands, we've heard social distancing, among other things, and that can really make a big difference in terms of what this communicability number is. We could bring it down to, if we bring it down to less than 1, then it means every person that catches it, less than 1 person after that catches it. And I'll give you some other stats that are pretty important as well. And one of those is the death rate. And this is what scares people the most. For influenza, that normally has a rate of about 0.1%, or 1 out of 1,000 people. For coronavirus, it's much higher. And if we look, I just did the numbers this morning on yesterday's update from the WHO. And if you look at it, it's about 4% in overall. It's a little bit higher in Italy, a little bit higher in some of the countries with older populations. But we really can't have a lot of confidence in this number yet. And there are a couple of reasons. And one of it has to do with the numerator, the number of deaths. We haven't really caught up with the number of deaths related to the sickness yet. And then number 2 is the denominator, and that's how many people that have the disease. And I think one of the issues with coronavirus is there has not been enough tests available globally to see how many people have it. And then also a lot of people only have a very mild case of it, which also if they don't go in to get tested because they don't feel sick, then we don't know to count them. So we really can't have a high degree of confidence in that 4% number that we've calculated so far. But it will, we'll get a better sense of it as time goes by. And just a point, and actually I'll get to this a little bit later too. I have some slides, but some of the populations that are most infected are older persons, as we've heard pretty consistently, and those with underlying conditions such as COPD, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and a few others that affect the immune system.
So how does this, John, being a pandemic, make it more challenging, let's say, for your industry?
Yeah, the pandemic, we've heard that term flatten the curve, and I think, when I first heard it, I wasn't quite worth it. I didn't quite know what they were referring to, but it's very important. You got to realize that if there are a lot of cases that are caught very quickly, then the healthcare system cannot adapt to that. There's not enough beds, there aren't enough ventilators, there aren't enough physicians, there aren't enough nurses to take care of that kind of shock to the system. And not only in the front end isn't important, but also if we have a huge number of individuals with the disease, we need to scale up treatments and vaccines when they become available. And that is also made more difficult when it's a pandemic. And just, in terms of defining pandemic and epidemic, which are the two terms that we've heard, the pandemic is when it is spread throughout the globe, which it has right now. It's in all different continents, and it's all over the place in those areas. And you contrast that to the epidemic, which is a little bit more localized. Let's see. And what are some of the other issues? I talked about the difficulty in making enough vaccine or treatment when they're ready. It takes a long time to not only get a drug tested to see if it's safe and effective, but then also to manufacture sufficient quantities to treat everybody. Just to give an example, the common flu vaccine that's given every year, it takes about a year of planning to get that out there. So, for us to get something ready for coronavirus, we might have to see a similar timeline, even though that sounds like a very long period.
Yeah, so what current approaches then are worth keeping an eye on in that treatment and vaccine area?
Yeah, there are two main approaches to address the virus: treatment and vaccine. The treatment is for people who already have the disease, and the vaccine is for those who may be exposed to it. And the treatment may be available earlier. And the reason for this is that there are already some candidates out there where the safety profile is somewhat understood, and also the risk of using it in somebody who already has the disease, where we're very concerned about their lives. It's an easier case to make to use a treatment that may have some side effects than to use a vaccine that may have some side effects before somebody has the disease, right? So the risk reward is a little bit more favorable there for treatments. And we found a few drugs out there that potentially can be used for treatments that have been in development for other diseases. There are a few antiretrovirals, which one is Gilead's remdesivir. And there's also a combination of other antivirals named lopinavir and ritonavir. And these drugs were developed for Ebola, and then those last two were for HIV. And they act as antivirals, which really inhibits the spread of the viruses. So when the virus gets into your body, the way it really gets you is by going into your cell and then replicating, and then going into another cell and replicating. It's an exponential type of thing. So if you're able to use these diseases, which inhibit their propagation, then you slow it down, and it gives your body time to catch up and eliminate the virus. The other one that we've heard about is chloroquine. It's for malaria, and it's used in combination with the antibiotic azithromycin. And there's been a lot of conflict about that, a lot of controversy about that, but I don't think there should be any more controversy for that one than there should be for the other two, because they're all in investigation. We don't know if they work. There seems to be some support for them working, but we really don't know yet, and we're just going to have to wait and let the clinical trials that are underway determine what's going to happen there. On the vaccine side, we've got a few candidates that are being investigated. Moderna is in the lead here. They actually have a vaccine that is already in man. They started a phase 1 trial in Washington just last week, I think. I actually heard an article about it, about the woman who was the first who first received the vaccine, and it's called mRNA 1273. And it actually, what it does is it targets the spike protein It targets the spike protein, so it gets into the mRNA gets into the cell, and the cell creates an antigen which gets the body prepared for the virus. So then when it comes along, it recognizes that the virus is there, and the body is able to more quickly address it. Another rapid responder to the call for a vaccine is Inovio. They've got a plasmid DNA approach, which allows human cells to produce protective antibodies, and they actually are going to be starting their trials in April. So pretty impressive timeline there, because generally a vaccine takes many, many, many years to even get into the human trials, and both of these companies right here have been able to do it in just a few months.
Yeah, I'm going to get more into the timeline here in just a minute, but first, since the vaccine development process for this virus is mostly in a blank area, I think we'd all agree, what do you see as the major hurdles that the industry has to overcome before they can move forward?
Yeah, Terry, I think I have a slide for this. Let me see. Yeah, okay, so this one right here kind of outlines some of the timeline for vaccine development. It is an area where, to the layperson, drug development, it kind of seems like it's shrouded in mystery. It's a long process. It starts with synthesizing a vaccine, then lab experiments, followed by animal testing. And a lot of times what will be done is a challenge will be conducted, a challenge test will be conducted with the animals, where they're given the vaccine, then exposed to the virus, and see how they react once they're exposed to it. And as soon as these tests show whether or not the vaccine works in living cells and in living organisms, and it's provoking the right response, they'll take it to the FDA to see if they can take it into human trials. So and I just mentioned Moderna just a minute ago. They actually started the phase 1 trial. This phase 1 trial is the first in human work that's done. It's done in healthy people that don't have any problems, so that they can see if there are any side effects. And then they move to a phase 2, which is the next step. This is in a little bit larger population to see whether or not the virus provides protection. And they're also keeping an eye on safety again. And then phase 3, which is known as a registrational trial, and it's the one that's able to show that it works in larger populations and that it's also safe in larger populations. When the clinical trials are done, then the company that developed the vaccine needs to take it to the FDA or other regulatory agency to get approval. And I think in most cases, this is a somewhat slow process, but I think now with the epidemic, the FDA is going to be working very, very closely with these companies as they're conducting the trials. So I think that once these are submitted to the FDA, they'll probably get approved. As long as they're safe and effective, they'll get approved pretty quickly. So we can expect that part of this will be uncharacteristically faster than normal. And then after it's approved, then they need to manufacture the quantities of vaccine that are needed. There's a few ways that are doing that. Generally for the seasonal flu vaccine, it's manufactured in eggs. That's very resource intensive. I think one egg produces approximately 2 vaccines. So you need millions and millions of eggs to get the numbers of vaccines that are necessary. There are a number of other approaches that are a little bit more efficient, such as recombinant or cell-based approaches, and these use bacterial cells or other kind of cells, yeast cells. There's a variety of cells, mammalian cells, to produce large quantities of the vaccine. So there's some new ways of doing it that may actually speed up from past ways of doing it and can save some time on the back end. To put it in perspective, the seasonal flu vaccine, that takes about 4 to 6 months to produce a sufficient supply to meet demand. But I think, with pressure on and the way things are going, we probably can beat that now.
And because this can be a time-consuming process, everything that you just outlined, where are we at on the timeline for a vaccine right now?
Yeah, it varies really, really widely. A couple of weeks ago, the president held a press conference where many of the top vaccine developers gave their best guess on the timeline. And, it really varies widely. I mean, we've had Moderna, which I just talked about, and Inovio and BioNTech. Those are 3 companies that anticipate human trials either this month or next month, which is really impressive to get something out just out of the lab in a few months. Others, said they can start trials by the late summer. And I heard Johnson & Johnson mention that they see their trials starting by the end of the year. And I've heard that approximately about 30 companies so far working on something, either a treatment or vaccine here. So, we're going to have companies all throughout the range of, the next few months to the next few quarters to, the next year to come out with their analysis and data. And we'll see how that goes.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone that if you have a question or questions for John, as it pertains to what we're talking about here, all you need to do is type them in the message field at the right-hand side of your screen, and we will get to as many as we have time for. So, John, you spoke earlier about other drugs already being used to combat other diseases that have been found somewhat effective in the treatment of COVID-19. You feel they have a solid fit into this overall picture?
Yeah, let me see if I can, did I have a slide on that where I talked about, yeah, here are some of the treatments, right? So yeah, Terry, glad you asked that because that's probably the best chance we have to combat the virus over the next year because the vaccines have never been tried before. And as they're preventative, the hurdle has to be a little bit higher to use them. So what my sense is what is in the lead right now is Gilead's remdesivir, and that's already been used in some emergency use cases in some very sick patients in Washington. There are also trials underway in the United States and China with that drug as well. Regeneron and Sanofi have launched a trial for their drug. It's a monoclonal antibody called Kevzara, and it's currently used for arthritis. And that product may prevent the immune system from overreacting and inflaming the lungs. Because I think one of the problems that we've seen with coronavirus is that the body can actually overreact to the disease, and the immune system will attack the cells in the lungs, which can cause pneumonia later on. And those patients in that case, they maybe not are dying from the virus itself, but actually from the pneumonia or the bacterial infection that they get from the damage caused in their lungs. So, there's a number of different approaches that can be used here. A third experimental approach is the generic antimalarial drug chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine in combination with azithromycin. And I mentioned that before to an earlier question you had. And that could shorten the duration of the infection and also reduce transmission. It's important to note that there are limited evidence for any of these. I just want to repeat that, because I don't want anyone to think that these are working. They're just experimental approaches right now. But they are in trials to show if they work. There may be some preliminary evidence showing that they could work, but we still need to do the trials to figure it out. But the positive aspect about these drugs and why they're already in humans is that they've already been used in other diseases, and we've gone through the clinical trial process to look at the safety profile for them, and that's the only reason why they're already in man right now, is because we already have some sense of the understanding of their safety profile.
So, because the reporter in me, John, always likes to dig a little deeper, something just came to my mind hearing you talk about all of this. Once we get a handle on this, once your industry gets the vaccine, right, to combat this crisis, this disease, going forward, just like every year we hear that the flu vaccine only attacks a certain strain, is that what we can look forward to with the vaccine for this particular disease, that every year a new one will have to be developed to attack a specific strain of it?
Yeah, I mean, that could be the case. Viruses mutate all the time. And in fact, that's where this one came from. It mutated probably from an earlier version of SARS. So yes, we're going to have to be vigilant. We're going to have to continue to see if the vaccine that comes out is able to treat what's out there. And what a lot of companies try to do is they try to target the conserved region, which that basically just means it's the region that doesn't change in the virus, so that it can be recognized by the body's immune system. So you create something in the body that the body recognizes of that conserved region, and then when that virus comes by, if that recognizes the conserved or same region, that it can attack it and kill it. Even though other parts of it may change, it can still recognize that part. So as long as we're able to come up with a vaccine that is able to do that, we'll be in good shape. And that's the great thing about having multiple vaccines and multiple approaches, is that even if one part of it changes, there may be an approach that attacks a different part of it. So to answer your question, yes, I do think it could change every year, just like the flu, and we'll have to continue to be vigilant.
So based on all of the time invested in development of a vaccine on the front end that we've kind of talked about vaguely already, and then more time invested going forward year after year, if that's certainly the situation, is COVID-19 vaccine ultimately going to be profitable to your industry?
Yeah, that's a good question, because infectious disease has historically been kind of a dead area for investment. Let me see if I can find this slide to help me talk about this. So yeah, I talk about just some of the issues on this slide, kind of guide the answer to the question you have. So yeah, there have been historically very long lead times of vaccines because there just isn't consistent funding. We have a scare, we put some money into it, and then we kind of feel like we're safe, and then we stop putting money into it. And I think what this current environment may do is incentivize governments around the world to say, hey, this is a serious thing. We need to have consistent funding. We need to have enough funding to come up with, with a solution, or be able to respond very quickly when something happens. Because if you look at this, we're losing trillions of dollars. I think I just saw the stat where global GDP is about $80 trillion a year. I could be off on that, but that's what I saw. So for every couple of weeks we're shut down, what is that? $1 trillion we're losing. And if governments can invest billions to save trillions, that is a great investment. So I think this may change the calculus on how governments are looking at this and how voters are looking at this to incentivize governments to do that. So we could see a lot more money being allocated to infectious disease companies, which in the past have been largely ignored. And I want to make another point about the vaccines. They are a pretty low margin business. Preventative medicine has never been something that people have been willing to pay a lot for. We're willing to pay a lot for cancer treatment to save our lives, but we're not really willing to pay that much for the flu vaccine every year. So the monetary incentive system is not there so much for preventative medicine as it is for some of the other areas. With this, that frame of reference, that frame of mind could change, and we could see some of these infectious disease companies being much better investments going forward due to public funds allocated to their work. Let me see, what else? Yeah, so another beneficial side effect could be just the boost it would give to a company's platform. We've seen a lot of companies out there that are taking drugs that maybe were the third or fourth on their list of on their platform and bringing forward because they do or could address the disease. And one benefit that a company may have is if they're able to show that their platform works on a vaccine, it'll bring them into the public eye, it'll help them raise capital, and it'll really show that their platform is effective. So it could it could be a positive for a lot of these companies that have been ignored for a long time.
Okay, I'm getting a note from our producer alerting me to some members of the audience not being able to get sound or hear what we're talking about here. And they tell me for anyone having that problem, we apologize for it. First of all, try calling the phone number 213-929-4232 and using the access code 504-770-783. They say we're going to be posting something to that effect as well. Again, we apologize if audience members are having a difficult time hearing this valuable information. John, let's stick with the investment perspective here. From that perspective, if investors want to put some money in this area right now, which types of companies should, maybe not specific companies, but types of companies should investors be watching?
Sure. I categorize them into two groups. There were treatments, and then there's vaccines. I think I heard on a news report this weekend there are about 30 companies, and actually I saw a couple news releases this morning for new companies. So there's probably more than 30 companies that are working on either a treatment or a vaccine. there's many press releases out there where listeners can go to look to see who's working on that. I actually made a list of just some of the companies I came across in addition to the ones I mentioned that are working in these areas. Infectious disease, as I mentioned, that's the area where where the interest is right now for coronavirus. So one thing I always tell investors when they ask what to buy is, you need to have a diversified portfolio. That's rule number one when you're investing. Have a diversified portfolio of companies, so you average the risk out over all of them. And I did make a list of specific companies. I'll just show that to everybody. And we do receive compensation from some of these on here. But it's a pretty good cross section of who's working on what. Not all of them have talked about all of their programs. I mean, you can see like Sanofi, they just gave very, very general information on what they're working on, but others such as Inovio or Gilead, they gave a lot more detail on what they're doing and what their timeline might be. So this can be used, this list right here could be used as kind of a starting point on what on where to take a look and do further research.
And you also had some slides that provided statistics on some of the vulnerable populations to the virus. Can you share some analysis of those?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of us have heard this so far. It's not really new news. At first, when the data first came out of China, they provided similar numbers as this. This slide right here shows some information the CDC in the United States put together with the United States population. The period is February 12th to March 16th, so it's about cutoff date was about a week ago, and it shows similar information as to what the Chinese data showed, that the older you are, the higher risk you have of deaths, and deaths is that dark blue bar on the right. And one thing we should note is not all of these categories have the same number of ages in them. The 0 to 19 group is almost 20 years. The 20 to 44 is 15 years, and then the other ones are 10-year increments, except for over 85, which is all the way up to whatever. So the one other point I'd like to make from this slide is that as of the date of this, there were no deaths in individuals below 20. So I think that's pretty interesting because when you compare this with normal influenza, there's generally a U shape of deaths. People at the very old end of the spectrum and the very young are most susceptible. But here it appears to be kind of a straight line up to the right, where older individuals are more susceptible than younger. Let's see. So here's another chart that I put together based on the CDC data, based over the same period as the last chart. And actually they gave a range, and I just put the midpoint of the range for each one of these age groups. But you can see the 85+ group. It just goes to show why these individuals should stay quarantined by themselves until this thing really settles down, because they're very, very susceptible to dying from it or having very serious complications from it. Another important item to look at is some of the China data that came out. I didn't find anything similar from the CDC yet, although I'm sure they're working on it, but it's death rate by comorbidity. You can see that it's really, really high for individuals with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, chronic respiratory disease, hypertension, or other ones. If you have any problem with your immune system, or you're going to be at a higher risk than someone else. Also looking at the Chinese data, I don't have a slide on this, but males were much more susceptible than females to the disease. So, you can see some of the risk factors out there. If you're old and if you're old, male, and you have cardiovascular disease, you're going to be in a very high risk category. Let's see, what else can I say about this? One other thing that I think was interesting, I read an article on, was just that smoking may be an issue as well. This came out of some of the Chinese data where more men smoke than women, and that might have been one of the reasons why they suffered a higher death rate. And one of the hypotheses that I heard about this is actually smoking creates more receptors on the cells in the lungs, which the virus can then attach to. So it actually increases the probability of getting more of the virions in your lungs and causing bad problems. So just another reason to quit smoking potentially to avoid getting infected with coronavirus.
That's an interesting statistic. But let's flip back to the vaccine development for a moment. We didn't talk about some of the risks that may be associated with vaccine development.
Yeah, and I think everyone's frustrated that it takes so long to get things into the clinic and get things approved by the FDA. But really, we've learned throughout history that trying to go too fast and not being careful and looking at some of the risks and kind of the tails of the population, that we can get ourselves in trouble. And there was one instance in the 1970s when there was an outbreak of swine flu in the United States, and they quickly got a vaccine out without fully testing it, and it caused this condition called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which makes you it's a type of paralysis. You can't move.
Yeah, that was big back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of forget about that as time goes on. But there's other examples as well, which I won't go into. But there's reasons why it takes so long. Why we go step by step. Let's say we have a 1% to 2% death rate for for coronavirus, but then we make a vaccine that has a 1% to 2% side effect that's permanent and debilitating. Well, we really haven't helped anybody. We really haven't helped anybody, and that's why it's so important to go through the process and figure out how the vaccine works. And there's another issue as well called disease enhancement. In some cases, a vaccine can be administered, and then it actually makes the patient more susceptible to the virus than they otherwise would be. It actually allows in some cases, it allows the virus to attack the cells more virulently. So, these are all the issues that we try to address by going through the stepwise process of phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials.
And I believe you had a list of companies up that have exposure to treatment or a cure for coronavirus. Anything else we need to know about those?
Yeah, let me go back. So here's the list. I don't want to say too much here because I don't cover most of these companies. A few of them I do, but Inovio we talked about. They're kind of in the lead along with Moderna. We've got one interesting company that I think merits a discussion is Dyadic. They're actually working on a faster expression system. As I mentioned before, one of the hurdles to getting sufficient vaccine out there is that you can't make it fast enough. The chicken egg example, that just takes too long. So I think we're going to have to find some way to more quickly develop a vaccine and a treatment when it's approved, especially when there's a pandemic like this and potentially billions of people can be exposed. So yeah, I think this is a great starting off point for our listeners to use to find some ideas here if they want to pursue something.
John, we've covered a lot of ground here in this special report. Is there anything else that we might have missed that you think is of value?
There may be. I'd love to take any questions if there are any others out there from anyone. I think this is an unprecedented time in the world right now. I don't think there's ever been a time when the whole world is kind of shut down as it has now, and the rapid economic impact that's taken place. But I want to say I have a lot of respect for a lot of the doctors and physicians out there that are working so hard to help us all out, because they do take a lot of risks, and it's just fascinating what they do. And the scientists that are really helping us, it's a great thing. So yeah, I'd like to leave it just thanking all those people.
So as with the economy in general, John, is it accurate to say at this point in your industry specifically, there are still more questions than there are answers for?
Yeah, it's we know the process. I think that's the important thing, is to know how we're going to go through this, and it's a stepwise process. I think everyone is incentivized to really be efficient and figure out a way to treat it, because it's very, very important for the people we care about, and I have a lot of confidence that we're gonna move forward and find a way to treat it.
Well, John, we thank you for your time and all of the information that you shared with us. With that, we're going to have to wrap things up here on this special report. Senior Small Cap Biotech Analyst John Vandermosten for Zacks Small Cap Division. Our thanks again to him. If you have any questions, listeners out there, regarding the Professional Services Division, the services that they offer, feel free to email them to zrs@zacks.com. If you would like copies of John's PowerPoint presentation that was featured in today's report, again, please email that same address, zrs@zacks.com. You can also contact your ZRS representative directly or access those PowerPoint slides in the GoToWebinar console associated with this presentation. On a side note, we hope everyone is doing as well as they can during this very challenging time. I know everyone here at Zacks is doing what they can to service each of you during this crisis, as many are upholding the social distancing by working remotely. We appreciate and thank you for your understanding on that note, as we all try to come together by staying apart. Meantime, thanks for joining us. Feedback always welcome. In fact, after you close out of the webinar, you'll be prompted to fill out about a minute survey. We'd appreciate if you would fill that out, because we use those comments to improve the quality and content of future special reports like this one. And for those of you who joined in late, this has been a special report on COVID-19 from the Professional Services Division of Zacks Investment Research. Be well.